We're a holistic organization. While we are a land trust, we also feel it's important to protect the water that runs through the land and the air around it and the critters therein. So we also do a lot of other work besides land conservation. We do research and advocacy and education. And in research and advocacy, we've had a lot of really great projects for people who don't know our work. We've done current study in the bay, toxics work to determine what some of the toxins are in the bay, sediment studies. And we use those data that we collect in that research to then do the advocacy that we do. And we've done a lot of advocacy over the years. A lot of it around fish passage, suing dam owners to create fish passage. We're working on, which sometimes doesn't work that well, but we're still trying because it's important. We helped open the St. Croix River to alewives for the first time in a couple decades. It was closed illegally for a long time. We helped get that open, and it's important. We work around Mary Meeting Bay, but we also work at the municipal level, the state level, and the federal level as well, because as we know, it's all connected. So we do that, and at Presumpscot, we're trying to make sure that the fish passage integrity is going to continue. There's some problems down there. And other things that we've worked on just recently, we are trying to keep the state from lowering the water quality standard for E. coli. We don't know why they're doing that, but they are. There's been a bill before the legislature to usurp home rule in municipalities so that they can't pass their own pesticide bans around the state, and several have, and to great effect. So that's a democratic issue, small d, and a toxic issue as well. So there are a lot of things we do up there and around the municipalities and at the federal level, as I said. Right now, the big thing that we're working on, and why I'm probably stumbling around my tongue, is because I'm tired. We have our Bay Day coming up for the spring next Tuesday. We have about 50 volunteers, 200 kids coming out from away their desks, out from under fluorescent lights, out from away from their devices, and getting them into the mud and doing beach seining and fish printing and bird identification and tree identification and walks with people who know about coyotes and some Native American focuses as well for the majority of the day. And it's a big undertaking which we cannot do without the integrated work of all of the volunteers that we have, and we're very lucky to have some really good committed volunteers, some of whom are in this room right now, so thank you very much. If anybody would like to help with that, because it's a lot of fun, in the spring it's at Chop Point School, which is right there at Chop Point, and in the fall it's in Bodenham down at the game management area. So just give me a call or come up and talk to me, and we'll try to get you involved with that. We also do water quality monitoring around the bay. So part of our education is doing that. We also go into schools all around the bay, talking about ecology and adaptation and different environmental things. I was at a school yesterday where a girl in 4th grade came up and said, "Do you work for Friends of Mary Meeting Bay? Do you actually work there?" I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Take me with you. I want to do that. Take me with you." And they're like, that just sent a chill up my... It was so great. It was just such a wonderful thing. And she's coming to Bay Day on Tuesday. So yay, in ecology and in the environment. And part of the education also are these talks that we do every year. This is our last of this season. Look forward to our outdoor series, which will be coming up this summer. We'll get postcards out to folks. If you're not a member, sign up and you'll get one of those postcards. So you can fill out something and become a member, because I think we do really good work. The speaker series that we do costs about $1,000 a year. Patagonia has been really great about donating things to us that we then raffle off. This month it's this guy, and if you're tiny, you can get a different size if you go down there, because that is like bigger than a dress on me. So, what we do is we have this to put your name on, and then you can put your name in here, and then just put your money in the basket. If you put in at least $5, that would be great. Do what you can afford. But we also take checks, so $1,000 would be even better. And we'll pass that around. In fact, I'll start doing that right now. Thank you, Libby. And then there's a sign-up sheet, which helps us mostly to, you need a pen, which helps us mostly to figure out what is most interesting to the people who come to this. So when we have 75 people show up, or 100 people show up as opposed to 10, we know we probably want to do more of that, whatever that is. So, so if that will be going around, when it comes to the end of a row, maybe we could pass it across the row and then it will go back and forth all the way around. So that leads us to why you're here tonight. I'd like to introduce our speaker. Ron Butler is a professor of ecology and a biologist with research interests in behavioral ecology, community ecology, and conservation biology. During the past 40 years, he has worked in Antarctica, Newfoundland, and Maine on a variety of projects concerning the ecology and conservation of seabirds, dragonflies, butterflies, and bees. Butler presently helps coordinate the 3 statewide citizen scientist initiatives, including the Maine Damselfly and Dragonfly Survey, the Maine Butterfly Survey, and most recently, the Maine Bumblebee Atlas. Bumblebees just showed up at my yard just this week. In addition to teaching courses in zoology, ecology, entomology, ornithology, and conservation biology, Ron also co-teaches tropical island ecology each May term in the U.S. Virgin Islands, damn it. So he has a PhD in ecology, zoology from SUNY College of Environmental Science and Syracuse University. Please join me in welcoming Ron Butler.
Well, thanks for inviting me. The last day about the Virgin Islands, I didn't really feel like I was rainbow and it was snowing. It was snowing that day before. A week from Saturday, I'm in seawater, about 82. Nice contrast. So today, what I'm going to do is talk about one of my favorite groups of insects, something that I actually started watching as a kid. That and seabirds, and kind of in the latter part of my career, came back to insects after spending the first half on cold, windswept, rainy seabird islands.
Do you want me to get you?
In some really cold places like Newfoundland and Antarctica. And I finally discovered insects that are really only out on nice, sunny, warm days. What I was thinking about all these years. But this particular group is of interest historically, and I've got this on PDF now, so it's not phasing in the way it normally does. So when I go back and look through historical references to this group, I can find that these dragonflies seem to appear 1500 BC on stone seals. Now, it's not on this particular stone seal. I actually couldn't find a stone seal that had a dragonfly on it, but that's what they looked like. Very popular in many cultures, for example, in medieval Japan. The mon, the crest of a clan, oftentimes was a dragonfly. If you look at this tsuba, this is the hilt of a Japanese katana. You can see the dragonfly there, and then clearly on that warrior's helmet. Various indigenous peoples have used them for decoration or spirit worship. The earliest literary references I find about 700 AD, again in the Japanese tradition, haiku, and then much later the first European mention in the work of Francis Bacon, about 1600s. People eat them. Not me, but people do. I understand they're good grilled or boiled with spices. In a number of countries, they're used medicinally. So in Madagascar, apparently if you put one under your hat, it relieves headaches. It's a new one on me. But certainly they get used, as many kinds of insects do, for a variety of reasons having to do with folk medicine. I collected a bunch of names, and I'm going to point out that these are all from the European tradition. Okay? You'll notice most of them are not very positive. Eye stinger. I'll tell you the one I grew up with. It's this one, the first one. Right? My grandmother told me when I was about 5, as we were watching some dragonflies, that darning needles sewed the lips of little boys together who told lies. That's why I studied seabirds at first, okay? But actually, all of these seem to carry either a connotation which isn't really clear, like balance fly. What does that mean? I'll come back to that. There's some association with snakes in many European countries. Lots of rumors, more than folk tales, of people or animals being stung by dragonflies. Doesn't really happen. But a horse that reacts to a horsefly and happens to have a dragonfly near it, guess what gets blamed? The dragonfly, right? There's a collection of countries where I've tried to grab the most prominent cultural perception of dragonflies. Italy's is interesting. Dragonflies sent from hell by Satan. Sweden, the devil's steelyard. Dragonflies flying around you are weighting your soul. And if they fly around you, that's not a good thing, okay? We've already dealt with America and my grandmother. Japanese, mostly positive. Lots of indigenous peoples, either spirit animals of some kind, or in the case of, this is a Navajo sand painting, or at least a sketch of one, symbol of water purity. Again, the Sunni had them associated with supernatural powers and shamans. The Tahitians have a long history of blaming insects for all sorts of things. Most of them are seen as familiars of the various gods, and almost all of them have a negative context. And the dragonfly in Tahiti is believed to be the familiar of the god Hero, the god of thieves. So the dragonfly flying around you is keeping you occupied while somebody's robbing your house. That's the way that's supposed to work. So, in contemporary culture, tattoos, the names of establishments, probably name a coffee after dragonflies. If I have one more well-meaning relative give me my 3,000th dragonfly coffee mug for Christmas. But obviously really popular in this culture. So let's talk about the critters. They have a really old, ancient lineage. Some of the first insects, in fact, the oldest fossil remain that we have of insects right now is about 407 million years ago. It's a pair of jaws, and they look remarkably like present-day dragonfly jaws. Now, I don't believe dragonflies were the first insect by any stretch of the imagination, but they've been around for a long time. This critter is always referred to as a giant dragonfly. It's not. The Meganisoptera are actually what we call griffin flies. They're related to dragonflies, except quite a long time ago, I'm going to guess almost 25 million years before real dragonflies appeared, and large. Okay, so 28 inches, yeah, big dragonfly-like critters. We believe that insects that large could not exist on the present planet because the oxygen concentration of the atmosphere is much lower now than it was then, and their respiratory system would not allow a body that large. The largest insect I know of is a South American longhorn beetle that you have to use 2 hands to hold. Okay, that's pretty big. We get real dragonflies probably about 300 million years ago. There's a 150 million year old fossil that's obviously a dragonfly. This is a lestid from about 25 million years ago in an amber inclusion. It looks pretty much like any lestid that you would see today. Okay? And again, here's the size. This is a larva. Okay, that's a big animal. So I just want to point out the big picture here in terms of insect evolution. So here we have all the species of insects that are alive today, in terms of, all the orders. And here are the odonata, and as you trace this back, you can see the odonata appear right about here. And interestingly, if you cut across here, you notice that most of the contemporary insect groups were not present at the time dragonflies evolved. So they're some of the earliest ones. Presently on the planet, we have 5,574 known species. That number goes up and down depending upon whether a species becomes extinct or somebody finds a new one, but that's pretty close. They're divided into the Anisoptera, which are the dragonflies, and the Zygoptera, which are the damselflies. So this is a dragonfly. This is a damselfly, right? And you can see it's roughly equivalent in terms of the distribution. There used to be a third group here, but it's not, since been lumped in with the dragonflies. So, how do you tell the difference? Well, there are a bunch of ways. Normally dragonflies are bigger. Now, having said that, we have a species of dragonfly in Maine that's about the size of this damselfly, maybe even a little smaller. The name of the suborder indicates that the wings of the dragonfly are asymmetric. So you can see the hind wings are actually broader and slightly different shape than the forewings. Damselfly wings are much more symmetric. So this animal actually has them folded together so they almost completely overlap one another. Dragonflies, for the most part, cannot fold their wings back after they emerge. When they land, their wings are always out, right? Damselflies fold their wings together, and it has to do with the architecture of their thorax where the wings are attached. This is the head. This is the size of the eye. This is the head. This is the size of the eye. Now, this animal has big eyes, but proportionally, these are huge. In fact, dragonfly eyes, proportionally, are the largest eyes of any insect. Size range, as it turns out, the largest odonata is the order, is actually a damselfly. A Costa Rican damselfly with a wingspan of about, from tip to tip, of about 7.5 inches. Right? As it turns out, the smallest is also a damselfly. It's got a wingspan from tip to tip about like that. Okay? So, not everybody realizes that dragonflies spend much, and in some cases most of their life underwater as larvae. So, with a few exceptions, there's a couple of species who the larvae actually exist in really moist soil and substrate, not in the water, but the vast overriding majority of these guys are aquatic. Their eggs hatch in water or near water, and they basically live their life as a larva growing underwater. And so the damselflies have these external gills. Dragonflies don't. Their gills are actually inside their cloaca region here, so you can't actually see them. So this is a dragonfly, that's a damselfly. This one you can't tell, but we know it's a dragonfly. Here's obviously a damselfly. You can see the gills there. These guys are voracious predators, all of them. Okay? They eat anything as larvae, including fish and small salamanders and insects and worms, anything. And they have this kind of nightmarish alien mouth part that is basically kept hinged underneath, right? And then strikes out at a prey item and grabs it and pulls it back to the real mouth to consume. This still didn't work. Oh well. I was going to show you one emerging, but I use a PC and that's a Mac, and they're not getting along. I hope that's the only example. So basically, dragonflies and damselflies are built sort of like other insects. They're divided up into three parts: a head region, a thorax region, and the thorax has both the wings and the legs attached to it, and then an abdomen. Okay? And in dragonflies and damselflies, there are 10 separate abdominal segments. One of the unique things about these guys, given the fact that I said dragonflies have proportionally the largest eye among all insects, is the fact that each of these eyes is actually composed of, and you can kind of sort of see them here, 30,000 little individual optical units, each one with its own lens, its own neural connection to the central nervous system, and the whole 9 yards. These guys, because of this size of their eyes, can see almost, but not quite, 360 degrees. They have a blind spot which is below and behind them, but it's real hard to sneak up on one. Like us, they see into the visible spectrum. Unlike us, they also see ultraviolet and polarized light. Okay? A number of animals do, humans don't. So again, you can see those little, and they're actually hexagonal, those little individual optical subunits in these eyes. That's unfortunate. The dragonfly that you can imagine here. Dragonfly wings work independently of one another. If you watch dragonflies very long, you'll see that. So the hind wings and the forewings can beat independently of one another. These guys are incredibly maneuverable. They can fly sideways, backwards, hover, fly forward. I always find the speed, their estimated speed, is always higher than it really is. I always see 30 to 50 miles an hour. The highest speed that I can find recorded by any study is like 24. So I'm guessing 25 is probably the top speed. As dragonflies do lots of flying, it's actually interesting that most damselflies do relatively little by contrast. So damselflies are relatively weak flyers. They spend a lot of their time perching. Sex differences. And I had to flip this slide so you'd have the same perspective. That's why the writing is backwards. So I could say, well, geez, females have a thicker waist and a thicker abdomen, but that's not reliable. What is really reliable is right here. You see this little structure here? And that's smooth. A little structure right there, and I'll come back to that. So as it turns out, males have both primary and secondary sex organs. Females' sex organs are back here. Males are back here, but they're also up here. Okay. And I'll show you how that works. But that's really the definitive characteristic. As you can see here, these guys are the same color. That's not going to work. Now, in some species, males and females are different colors, but in many they're not. So this is one of the cases where they are. So basically, this is the male of this species. We don't have this one in Maine. Find it as soon as you get into New York and farther west. This is an immature female, and this is a mature female. So in this particular species, you can tell the difference based on color alone. This is a species we do have in Maine. This is the eastern forktail. This is a male, so and males always basically look like this once they're mature. This is an immature female, and that's a mature female. So quite different looking by contrast. No, there's no courtship. Very few species engage in courtship. Males basically grab females. That's how it works. Okay? Now that seems brutal, so let me qualify that. Females control courtship, not males. Okay? And here's why. This male has grabbed this female using special appendages on the very last abdominal segment. And so here are these appendages. They're paired. There's two of each of these, one on each side, right? If you look, each one of these is slightly or majorly different from the other ones. So the male uses these to stick into this lock. If you want to think about these as the keys, this is the lock. And that's what's going on here. The male has just grabbed that female. That's not copulation. They're not mating. He's just grabbed her. That's all he can do. She controls everything else. If she wants to mate with him, she's got to bring her sex organs all the way up to his. Okay? And when that happens, it's this. It's called the wheel. Dragonflies tend to do it in flight. Damselflies tend to do it while they're perched. Okay? And so she's now actually receiving the sperm that he's produced and is going to enter her reproductive tract and hopefully fertilize her eggs. Right? So what happens if she doesn't want to mate with him? Well, he can't do anything about it. And so what males do is they kind of stay attached for a while, and then they give up and go looking for another date, right? If she's not going to cooperate. If they mate successfully, many species, not all, but many species of dragonflies and damselflies guard their mate. And the reason they do that is the last male who mates with a female tends to fertilize most of the eggs that she's going to lay. And so if he stays attached, and by the way, this is a globally rare damselfly that we have here in Maine, called the scarlet bluet. If he stays attached, then no other male can attach to her and mate with her. So he basically he's basically attached to her. They're flying around together. She's settling down, and what you don't see right now is she's basically making a little slit in the bottom of that, looks like water shield, leaf, and she's going to put a single egg in there, and then she's going to move on. And he's basically stuck going with her. Okay. This is an unfortunate picture because about 45 seconds after I took this, a spider came over the other side and grabbed his head and ate it. It's risky dating. So here you can see a variety of the females. So the males are always going to be these guys, right? The females are busily ovipositing. Here's a dragonfly doing it. They don't actually lay it in plants like damselflies do. There are some species where the females don't hang out with the males. And there are some species where they don't stay attached, but the male guards and drives off any male who attempts to mate with her while she's ovipositing. And some of these guys, the damselflies in particular, always insert their eggs in aquatic vegetation, and they will sometimes go right underwater. And I have seen males let go once it means getting completely submerged. And you can see her, she's completely submerged now, and she's cutting a hole in that stem. So what comes out of the egg? Well, we get this odd little critter called a prolarva, which will eventually metamorphose into a regular larva, and then go through 9 to 13 growth stages before they're ready to become an adult. And so with dragonflies and damselflies, either they overwinter as eggs, they overwinter in this stage, or they overwinter as larval. And it really depends on the species, and it depends on where you are geographically. And so that cycle continues then. Again, both dragonflies, and you can see this is a dragonfly. You don't see those big external gills. They tend to hunt through aquatic vegetation for their prey. Some of them are ambush predators, some of them hunt more actively, but they're all predators. So why are these guys important? Why do we follow them so avidly for scientific reasons? We know that these guys are really important in aquatic food webs. As predators, and you can see there's a group of these guys eating a variety of critters, right? But lots of things in aquatic food webs eat them. So some of the very same fish that they feed on when they're little tiny fry, as adults feed on the larvae. Same with the salamanders. Same with tadpoles versus frogs, okay? And all sorts of aquatic birds and crayfish and a variety of things. So as larvae, these guys are important both as predators and prey. And anglers know this, right? If you fly fish, you know about odonates. As adults, these guys are now out of the water, they're in the terrestrial environment, and again, they're important predators. And they're important prey items. So they eat lots of things eat them. including some things that they thought they've escaped in the water. It's dangerous for dragonfly females to oviposit because fish try to take them, frogs try to take them as they oviposit. Well, that's not going to work at all. Okay. Well, so let me just ignore the text there. The third reason they're important is we consider the odonata, the damselflies and dragonflies, to be important ecological indicators. I've already pointed out their roles in both wetland and terrestrial food webs. They rely on nearshore aquatic plants, many species do, to breed in and grow in and feed as larvae. And they also rely on nearshore terrestrial vegetation to emerge onto, to roost in, to feed on, and to overnight in when they're adults. So dragonflies can be good indicators of shoreline and nearshore vegetation habitat integrity because of their reliance on it. There are some species that are actually sensitive to some classes of water pollutants, and so they can be important indicators in that regard as well. Major conservation concerns, development. Development's a problem. When people basically cut down all the vegetation to the shoreline and plant nice green lawns that go all the way down to the shore, they really have an incredible detrimental impact on water quality, as you're probably all well aware. They also impact dragonflies because they've eliminated that really key near-shore terrestrial vegetation that the animals absolutely depend on. And of course, raking your swimming area is basically eliminating their breeding habitat. Public access and its impact on water quality is another conservation concern for these guys. We're relatively fortunate in Maine that we have very few lakes that look like this one. But it's coming in some places in southern Maine. Climate change is always the big question mark in terms of its impact on all sorts of plants and animals. And of course the problem with introduced species, particularly releasing dragonflies as mosquito controls. Don't even get me started on this. Okay. So how about Maine's situation? We have 447 known species in North America, and Maine's got 158 of them. We have more species of odonates than some countries. We have more species of odonates than California. It's much larger than our state. Right? So we have a really rich odonate fauna here. And it has to do with kind of a north-south transition of biophysical regions that we have, and the very different kinds of wetlands we have in Maine, and the abundance of wetlands we have in Maine. So. When I look across our species, I find we have 6 families of dragonflies, although I really suspect there's a 7th that we just haven't found. It's right over there in New Hampshire. So, and 3 species of damselflies. Excuse me, families of damselflies. So these are the families. So we have what we call the jewel wings, the spread wings, and the pond damsels. So those are all damselflies. And then we have these 6 families of dragonflies. And I'll just go through. I'm hoping not to see black now. Whew. These are the jewel wings. Okay. These guys tend to be associated with stream and river habitat. By far and away, this guy is the most common. If you visit almost any stream that has overhanging vegetation, you're likely to find these guys. They're very photogenic. They're very territorial. They'll stay perched unless you get really close to them. And while this looks like it's got black wings and a metallic green body, it really depends on the light because it can turn to blue depending upon the perspective. So they're quite dramatic when you see them. You all know this guy, right? Probably everybody's seen this. Or maybe not. There's lots and lots and lots of little blue damselfly species in Maine, as it turns out. Right? That's why they're called bluets, because they're basically blue in color, blue and black. And yes, you can, by the color pattern, identify a number of these guys to species. So the color works pretty well with at least the males. There are also some bluets that aren't blue, including the scarlet bluet, which I showed you already. This guy is called the Vesper bluet. You tend not to see them till 5, 6, 7 at night. You don't see them during the day much. This is an interesting group of damselflies. I said damselflies keep their wings folded together, but not this particular family. They sort of hold their wings like this, and hence they're called the spread wings. And we have a number of species of these guys in Maine, too. And I want to point out, I always get asked this question at some point, dragonflies are very seasonal. And by seasonal, I mean each of these species is not around all summer. Some of them are early summer, spring, early summer. Some are midsummer. Some are late summer, early fall. A few species you can find pretty much throughout the entire season. Same with dragonflies. They can be very seasonal. Darners, probably the group that most people are familiar with. Many, many species of these have this kind of brown-blue, green-brown-blue color pattern that can be confusing if you haven't worked with them. This is our biggest dragonfly in Maine, relatively rare, the comet darner. Really vivid, Indian orange kind of, glow-in-the-dark abdomen. This is probably our earliest darner because it's a migratory species. These guys should be appearing today. Well, it was snowing though, maybe not today. But these guys didn't emerge here. They've moved up from farther south. Like we think about monarchs being migratory species. Well, these guys are migratory as well. This is the green darner. The clubtails, the Gomphidae, known for this club-like appendage. Not all of them have it, but this is our biggest clubtail, one of my favorites. A genus brevistylus, also called the dragon hunter. Because this one, amongst other things, will prey on dragonflies, large ones. We have a lot of species of these in the state. And again, you see this club, you know it belongs to this family. Now some don't have that club, but most of them do. The Cordulidae are the emeralds, and they're called the emeralds because of that. Now, they don't all have that emerald green eye, but many of them do, and that's... So you can see this guy doesn't, right? But many species do have it. And yellow dark body is a real common color pattern in these guys, as is metallic and dark. We have 3 species of spiketails, and they all have this dark color base and vivid yellow markings. Only 2 of these guys. This is one of the first dragonflies in Maine that emerges. This is Didymops transversa. It probably another week or so will start emerging in southern Maine if it hasn't already. This guy is kind of more a midsummer species. The single biggest family of dragonflies are the skimmers. Skimmers, unlike all the other ones, spend much of their time perching. Most of them are territorial, and males tend to find a perch in their territory to kind of drive other males out of. And the territory moves with time. They're basically waiting for females to come to the pond so they can mate with them. A very colorful group. Some of the early guys, these tend to be really little dragonflies, commonly called white faces. And you can see the white face on most of these. Appear relatively early. As summer progresses, we start getting some of the larger, more colorful species, including species that have wing coloration on their, that makes them relatively easy to identify from a distance. This little amber wing is our second smallest dragonfly. It's only about this long. And the wings are this really beautiful amber color. We have a complex of 8 species commonly called meadowhawks. 7 of them are red, 1 is black. And it requires some practice to be able to identify them to species in the field. This particular species, I think, still holds the record for the longest flying species in Maine. That's the autumn meadowhawk. So that's a late summer, fall species. I've actually taken pictures of these guys kind of sunning themselves next to the ice in November. Number of species with these nice blue bodies. This is our smallest species. It's like this long. It's a really tiny little dragonfly. And again, some of these guys really colorful. This is one that we actually had on the state list as one that was threatened, that once we started surveying for them, found they were actually much more common than people thought, and we actually delisted that species. The Halloween pennant. I'll talk a little bit about rarity. We often think about rare species as species that aren't very numerous. But in fact, when we define a rare species, we look at a bunch of things. We look at, how many there are and what their density is. But we also consider, for example, how big of a geographic range do they have? We consider whether they are habitat specialists. And we consider how much of that habitat actually exists for them to occupy. So when we talk about rarity, all those things factor into that consideration. And that becomes important in terms of the listing process at the state and federal levels and at global levels even. So it may well be, from the state's perspective, something is rare, but from the federal government's perspective, it is not. And so the state may list it, but the feds don't. Okay? The other side of the coin is federal listing always supersedes state listing. If the feds list it, we have to treat it as listed. Okay. I'll show you an example. This little species that I hand-trained, notice, okay, hadn't been found in Maine before. I found it in my front yard, literally in my front yard. It's probably been there a while. It's just nobody looked at it, right? Let me show you its range in Maine. Right here. Now, this is how much of Maine we covered when we did our survey over the course of 6 or 7 years. So we really covered the state fairly well. But that's the only place that was ever found, all by me, as it turned out, in the same little flowage of ponds. So that species is now listed by the state of Maine, okay? But it's found in many states east of Mississippi, down through Mexico, into northern South America. In fact, it's the most common species in its genus, okay? So it's actually a very common species that's rare in Maine. You see the difference? This species that I already showed you, the scarlet bluet, is found here in Maine, and actually right here, Stump Pond in New Vineyard. And I was going to say it's the northernmost site of this species on the planet, except somebody found it right over the border in New Brunswick, about there. Okay? But again, here's how much of the state we covered. Here's where we found it. That's its entire global range. That species is found nowhere else on the planet except where you see those red circles. You blow that up. So that is really rare. It's rare in number. It's got a really small geographic range. So it's globally a rare species. And that's really the difference in terms of perspective and scale when you think about rare versus non-rare. This is a federally listed endangered dragonfly that we do have in Maine. Anybody ever see something like that with blue eyes and these nice rings here? Give me a shout, because we're always on the lookout for it. I can't tell you where it is in Maine, but it is in southern Maine, for sure. For some reason I have this in here again. Now it's going to work here, but not there. All right. Let me just go to this. And again, on my original PowerPoint, these things phased in. But so I always get asked this question. Some towns like to import dragonflies. I think it's a terrible idea. There's no evidence that it actually works. There's no scientific evidence that it actually works. Okay. Remember I said dragonflies have been around for a couple 100 million years? They pretty much know what they're doing. Okay? They were here before dinosaurs. They outlived the dinosaurs. They're really successful. If there's a place that can support dragonflies, they're there already. All right? And they're there in the numbers that that system will support. Dumping more in makes the quality of that lake or pond, from a dragonfly's perspective, plummet. Okay? There is, in addition to introducing competitors, there's the chance of introducing species that are not native to Maine that will become established in Maine at the detriment of species that are native to Maine. So again, it's a bad idea. And finally, two other things. Dragonflies are generalist predators. They eat anything. We always think about, yeah, they eat like lots of, horseflies and deerflies. And, okay, can you find a horsefly being eaten there? All I see is butterflies and native pollinators. Okay? Anything that flies. Big dragonflies have attacked hummingbirds. Okay? Not always successfully. It's a kind of a, I think they're pretty well matched as it turns out. But yeah, it's a butterfly, bee. They eat anything. Okay? And the last, it's not legal unless you get a permit from the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. Now, the department does issue permits for introducing dragonfly larvae. They don't like it, but they do it. They don't like it for these reasons. But the condition is the supplier, whoever that is, has to supply nymphs from New England only, not from farther south or west. So there's I think an organization in Connecticut that harvests nymphs from western Massachusetts, and they are permitted, and they will permit for that. But you really, to be legal, you have to get a permit. You can be fined for introducing without a permit. If you're interested in dragonflies, I maintain the website for that program. There's lots of sources on here that you can consult. You can see what counties various species have been found in. You can see when they tend to fly, earliest flight date, last flight date, when you're most likely to encounter them. I've got a complete linked list of every species up there, so you can just toggle on male or female and pull up an image of it, right? Lots of websites, if you're interested in pursuing those. Dragonflies are very popular in lots of states, so there's lots and lots of dragonfly websites. If you want to see the final project report for the survey that we conducted. That's also on the website as a free PDF that you can download. If I always get asked about books, I don't know. This is my favorite Damselfly book. If I was just going to buy one book, it would be the one in the center. It's got Dragonflies and Damselflies, and it's pretty good. This one's got the Massachusetts one, which has most of our species, too. So, as I said, if you could just get one book, I'd get Dennis Paulson's. He did the eastern half of the country, he did the western half of the country. So, this survey we ran from '99 to 2005, and we increased our records of dragonflies in the state by 300%. So over 20,000 specimens were turned in for this survey. Lots of county records, new state records, 2 new U.S. records right here in Maine. And we actually delisted some species. Once we got out there and really started looking, we found some of the species the state had been protecting didn't need protection. They were common enough to take off the list. We did the same thing in the butterfly survey we ran from 2008 to 2015. We discovered new species. We increased the number of records of species by 300%. We had new state records. This little guy was staying at a family camp on the north shore of Moosehead and was taking the dog for a walk. And it's a new species of butterfly right there on the rosebush. This guy, up until a couple of years ago, hadn't been seen in the state for 100 years. It's back. It's a magnificent species. It's a really big swallowtail butterfly. And again, we removed some from the state list. So these citizen science initiatives are really important. And if you haven't really thought about getting involved in one of these, you might want to think about it, because we're running another one. Here's the hook. This is what we found out in terms of butterflies. This is what we knew when we started, and this is the coverage that that survey provided. Right? So, did we get every place? No. There's some places there aren't roads. Right? So it's hard to get to. This is what we know about bees in the state. So we have this new initiative underway, the Maine Bumblebee Atlas, where again we're recruiting people like you. We held special training sessions to get out and start surveying bumblebees.